Welcome back everyone to Bridge the Divide, where we examine irrational beliefs, the irrational behaviors that often follow, and how with education, rationality, and reason we can bridge the societal divides that they create. As of recent, it has been brought to my attention many times and by many viewers that my content has been skewed towards addressing what one would call low-hanging fruit. And you know what? They're right. Annoyingly, it is an adverse actuality that the appreciable abundance of apologetic affairs available for analysis is, to articulate aptly, abysmally, and aggravatingly atrocious. Eat your heart out, Professor Plink. So today, we're going to close out 2025 by taking a look at a video from the highly controversial public figure Dinesh D'Souza. Now, this video marks the first time I've ever covered anything by or about D'Souza, and let me tell you, the production process was, to say the least, eye-opening. So brace yourself, folks, because we're about to go in deep. And already I hate everything about that analogy and regret having said it. Now, for those of you who may only be familiar with D'Souza from random passing references in internet stories, or when he got his ass completely handed to him in his recent debate against atheist choir boy Alex O'Connor.
Is it possible for the Red Sea to be parted?
Sure, why not?
It is.
Okay.
Okay.
I mean,
is it possible for a...
But what does that do for us? Is it possible that Muhammad flew to heaven on a winged horse?
Ouch. Dinesh D'Souza is a Goan Catholic-raised Indian-American right-wing political commentator, author, and filmmaker. He's also a Christian apologist who pretty much focuses solely on anti-atheism talking points. And all of that, his books, his films, and his rhetoric, is undercurrented by him being a massive alt-right conspiracy theorist, which has resulted in him being constantly and heavily criticized for espousing racially incendiary viewpoints and promoting outright and easily debunked lies. Examples of which are his heavy promoting of the racially charged and long since debunked birther conspiracy surrounding former President Barack Obama, which is behavior that actually tracks with displays of racism and bigotry that trace all the way back to his time writing for the Dartmouth Review, in which he publicly outed members of Dartmouth's Gay Straight Alliance organization, published an interview that made light of a Ku Klux Klan lynching photograph, and mocked affirmative action in higher education with a published piece that was phrased in Ebonics. A collection of incidents, by the way, that culminated in the sudden resignation of then Republican leader and U.S. Representative Jack Kemp from the Review's advisory board. His claims in his book and film 2,000 Mules about the election being stolen through widespread fraud, which ultimately resulted in the publisher withdrawing both the book and film and issuing a public apology to an individual that was accused in the content, and D'Souza himself being forced to issue a public apology for using inaccurate data to make false accusations. His promotion of Third Reich-centric conspiracies surrounding Fox News scapegoat George Soros, and his claim that the events at the infamous 2017 white supremacist Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, in which counter-protester Heather Heyer was killed and 35 others were severely injured, when self-described white supremacist James Fields Jr. deliberately rammed his car into a crowd, were a false flag operation designed specifically to disparage and discredit the political right.
That's bad.
And oh, it doesn't stop there. In his book, The End of Racism, he minimized the plight of Black Americans facing institutionalized racial discrimination and called for a repeal of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. In What's So Great About America, he minimized the historical atrocities of white colonialism by recoloring them as lifting third world countries up to the beneficial standards of freedom of Western civilization. In The Enemy at Home, he saddled the cultural left with the blame for the torture and abuse that occurred at Abu Ghraib and the Muslim anger that resulted in 9/11. In America, Imagine the World Without Her, he ham-handedly attempted to put a positive spin on the violent, bloody conquest of indigenous and Mexican lands and the slave trade. And in The Big Lie, he pretty much just claims that the 2016 Democratic Party platform was the same as that of the Third Reich. Meanwhile, behind all of this, in 2014, D'Souza was charged with making illegal campaign contributions to the New York Senate campaign of Wendy Long and misleading the Federal Election Commission, the ensuing prosecution of which led to him pleading guilty to the felony charge of making illegal straw donations, for which he was sentenced to 5 years probation, house arrest, and a $30,000 fine. But don't worry too much about him, because in 2018, he was able to purchase one of Trump's official unconditional pardons. It must also be pointed out that the investigation into him revealed accusations of domestic abuse by his ex-wife Dixie Brubaker, who asserted that, in the classy style of Kent Hovind, he repeatedly used his martial arts training on her. And believe me when I say that all of this, the racism, the bigotry, the lies, the misinformation, the deliberate endangering of human lives, the felonious action, and the domestic abuse, are just the highlights.
Well, good pep talk. Fuck.
So obviously, after hearing all of this, one might be inclined to ask, hey JL, what the fuck does any of that have to do with Dinesh's claims about atheism in this video? And the answer to that is actually pretty simple. Absolutely nothing. Which one might be inclined to respond to that answer with, then why the hell are you bringing it up? Which, to be completely honest, is a question that even I asked myself during the production process. Now, anyone familiar with my content knows that when I address an individual directly, I do my due diligence on the individual so that I can ensure that I address their content appropriately. I mean, if you don't really understand the individual who resides behind the position, then how can you really address what they're saying beyond a basic surface level critique? I not only want to break down the substance of their claims and arguments, but I also want to know what exactly is it that drives these individuals to formulate their claims and arguments in the manner that they do, because identifying and solving that problem is what lies at the heart of bridging the divide. When I covered the big bad Dutch voodoo daddy of presuppositional apologetics, Cornelius Van Til, I found out that during his early years he was deeply influenced by the conservative and neo-fascist voices that rose up in the face of the Netherlands' economic instability at the turn of the century. The instability that forced his dairy farmer father to uproot and relocate the family to the United States. But was that specific influence the reason why his presuppositional argumentation fails? Of course not. It fails because it's philosophically bankrupt. But understanding the mind of the man does help us to understand the motivations behind why he formulated his argument in the way that he did. Those voices who left such a deep impression upon him in his early years inspired him to articulate his argument in a way that reinforced a fascistic grip on the minds of his fellow believers by providing them a justification for never questioning the faith. And when it comes to someone like D'Souza, I think that sussing out whether his rhetoric is entirely profit-driven performance or is deeply rooted in antisocial and harmful beliefs is important. But this is where this kind of work dances precariously on the line between honest critique and poisoning the well, which is a form of ad hominem attack. Specifically, it's a rhetorical tactic in which negative, often irrelevant information about a person is presented before they speak with the intent of biasing the audience against them, thereby discrediting their argument in advance. A good example of this would be if someone was in a debate about evolution against creationist Kent Hovind, and they used their intro to cite his felony tax evasion conviction and incidents of domestic violence. While the information they presented is well-documented truth, it ultimately has nothing to do with Hovind's blatant lies regarding the science that confirms evolution. So doing so would fail to address the argument that's on the table and only serve to paint Hovind as a grifting, narcissistic, misogynistic asshole, which he is. That all said, while producing this video, I suddenly found it increasingly difficult to address D'Souza, the man behind the claims, without that address inadvertently coming off as completely poisoning the well, which is precisely why I am making such a huge deal about it at the beginning of my response. By acknowledging the established facts of D'Souza's background, we are afforded a bit of insight into why exactly he presents his claims and arguments in the manner that he does. But it is vitally important to remember that those points must be addressed entirely separate from the statements that he makes about the position of atheism. So it is here that I ask you, my amazing audience, to keep in mind that while D'Souza may be a Jeffrey Combs and the Frighteners level of asshole,
You are such an asshole.
Yes, I am. I'm an asshole.
none of that will have any bearing on the logical validity of anything he may be presenting to his audience in regards to the position of atheism. Let's dive in.
Jesus Christ! Finally!
I've been talking about the hidden psychological motives of skepticism and atheism, and making the point that these ideologies, these ways of thinking are appealing because they help people to avoid moral accountability.
Firstly, skepticism has no hidden motive. Skepticism, by definition, is a position questioning the certainty or possibility of knowledge. At its foundation, it urges doubt and demands strong evidence before accepting beliefs. This is revealed in that the word stems from the Greek skepsis, meaning inquiry, and skepticism can range from local skepticism, which is doubting knowledge in specific areas such as the senses or morality, to global skepticism, which questions all knowledge claims. The ancient roots of skepticism can be found in the work of Greek philosopher Pyrrho, who emphasized suspending judgment over outright denial due to unreliable perceptions. And over time, that foundation has been expounded upon by prominent philosophers such as Michel de Montaigne, René Descartes, Pierre Bayle, David Hume, and Immanuel Kant, to name a few. Secondly, there are no hidden motives in the position of atheism either. The position of atheism is literally limited to not believing or not being convinced of the existence of a god or gods. And yes, we can argue that skepticism does play a role in the position of atheism, because why would anyone accept a claim of the existence of a god entity as being true when the claimant has nothing but logical fallacies to present in order to support their claim? And lastly, the position of atheism does not logically entail holding to any specific position regarding morality. This is just D'Souza trying to paint atheists as being inherently intellectually dishonest and morally corrupt, as though we all somehow don't realize or are flatly ignoring the very existence of our individual capacities for empathy and the systems of justice that we employ within society. So yeah, everything that Dinesh just opened up his entire video with is solely intended to poison the well.
Oh, the irony! It's too much!
And Christianity, I want to emphasize, is in fact a religion that demands a certain degree of moral accountability.
Well, it demands moral accountability no differently than any society or in-group does of its members. Christianity just backstops that demand with the vacuous assertion of the existence of some all-powerful entity that no one can escape the judgment of. All in all, it's just one of many types of psychological tactics that are designed to reinforce certain socially preferred behaviors while disincentivizing unpreferred ones. But moral accountability itself in no way requires the belief in the existence of a god entity. Non-believers can acknowledge that as empathetic agents, we are morally accountable to ourselves, to our loved ones, and to the societies in which we live and enjoy the benefits of. And we also recognize that the full weight of the responsibility of justice falls squarely on us as members of society, because no god exists for us to eschew our responsibilities onto.
Now, some people say, well, no, Dinesh, Christianity is about love, it's about forgiveness, it's about, well, it is, but let's remember that the love and forgiveness are temporal, which is to say that they apply to this life, and they're also, to a point, conditional.
This is just a recounting of what the Bible claims Jesus espoused about forgiveness. Essentially, while Jesus demonstrated radical grace, unconditionally forgiving, and showing mercy to sinners, he also preached that enjoying the forgiveness and mercy of his God was conditional upon one's willingness to express the same towards other people. And none of this has anything to do with the position of atheism, as all of it is predicated upon the assumption that what a particular book says is true because of the emotionally driven assertion that its particular God is the one that exists, which Dinesh has yet to demonstrate. And that's because, as you've likely already guessed, this video was in no way made for atheists, because it's made to reinforce the various ignorant biases that believers may hold against non-believers.
Christian forgiveness stops at the gates of hell, and hell is an essential part of the Christian schemes.
Also completely irrelevant to atheism, and it completely ignores the logical contradiction that is entailed by defining a God as being morally perfect and then claiming that it was that same morally perfect God that created an infinite punishment for finite crimes because by definition it arbitrarily wanted to, given that by definition there exist no imperatives that act upon the God, and annihilationism would be infinitely more moral by comparison.
So while the Gospels talk about the good news, the books also contain a lot of warning messages to prepare us for ultimate judgment.
You plan on addressing the position of atheism anytime soon, Double D? Or is all of this just going to be another irrelevant straw man to deceive the more gullible members of your audience?
There is a reckoning, and Scripture says that many people are extremely eager to avoid that reckoning. Listen to this, John 3:20. Everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light for fear that his deeds will be exposed.
Sure, that's what the cult manual says in order to reinforce the idea to the adherents that the cult has access to truth. But in reality, it's a religious idea that is predicated upon the very, very basic observation that people who know or feel they are guilty of committing a wrongdoing often, though not universally, will try to avoid their culpability. But that observation in no way demonstrates that the God of that faith actually exists, which of course entails that your appeal to cult doctrine in order to evaluate the morality of non-believers has no rational basis.
So right here you have the heart of what I've been trying to show, which is that if you don't like the light, you're going to want to deny its existence. You're going to want to say, hey, no, darkness is all we have. We have to live in the darkness because that's all there is.
Nope, that's just more cult nonsense. None of that is logically entailed. Just because non-believers don't accept your claim that a God exists does not logically entail that we have all committed or resigned ourselves to destruction and depravity. Try and remember, Dinesh, that it is not we who are the members of a self-deluding, proxy-cannibalistic, human sacrifice-worshipping apocalyptic death cult. You are. If you're going to address the position of atheism, you need to address it on its merits, that the position is in fact a rationally justified one as a result from a critical examination of the theist claim, and not that it's based on some appeal to emotion such as desiring to escape the judgment of an all-powerful entity. An entity, by the way, that we know for a fact does not exist. And if you're going to address morality, you need to first find out what meta-ethical position the atheist holds to. It's not logically entailed that we all hold to the same one, and then you need to do something like an internal or external critique. That would be the intellectually honest route. But then again, if you were actually interested in something like that, I imagine your past wouldn't look like a yellow brick road composed entirely of lies.
And you're not making an objective statement about reality. You're making a psychological statement about the way you want things to be.
Well, yes, if the atheist in question happens to be a moral anti-realist, which I happen to be. And it's not so much about what we want it to be, as it's more about what's in alignment with our individual stances, which, by the way, are in no way equivalent to mere opinions.
So the point here is not that atheists are evil people, that they do more evil than everybody else.
Incarceration demographics certainly show that.
My point is that atheism provides a kind of hiding place for those who don't want to acknowledge and repent of their sins.
And there is no logical justification for that claim because it's not an honest representation of what atheism is or what it entails. In fact, it's specifically worded to cast atheists as being inherently irrational in their conclusion, while you, Dinesh, have yet to address why they come to that conclusion. And while I will concede that there are atheists out there who hold their position for weak or bad reasons, that's not all atheists. If, like for someone like me, the position is predicated upon the fact that the theistic position is logically inconsistent, and as such requires one to engage in irrational reasoning to justify it, then you can't justify the claim that I'm an atheist because I'm irrationally trying to escape some god. A god that I know for a fact doesn't exist. And we're going to skip this section because Dinesh, in the most condescending manner possible, tackles the concept of nihilism by quoting from the work of Czesław Miłosz, who was a Polish-American poet and Nobel laureate for literature. Now hang on tight for a second because we're going to get into some fun facts. The Miłosz work in question here is titled The Discrete Charm of Nihilism, a title that was a pun on the 1972 Louis Buñuel-directed French surrealist satire The Discrete Charm of the Bourgeoisie, which actually makes a lot of sense when you understand Miłosz's antagonistic view of the counterculture and protest movements of the 60s and 70s respectively, when he referred to protesters as the spoiled children of the bourgeoisie whose political zeal was naive because he held that they possessed no real experience or understanding of the realities of war. And seeing as how Miłosz was teaching at Berkeley at the time, which was a hotbed for the protest movement, I imagine his time there was personally challenging. Now in this section, not only does Dinesh completely butcher the man's name,
His name is Czesław Miłosz,
and problematically claims that Miłosz was Czech.
I read a powerful essay by the Czech Nobel laureate.
But he also leaves out a contextually necessary, comprehensive explanation of what nihilism is, which is a philosophical stance that arises from critiques of meaning, value, and knowledge in the wake of the failure of traditional systems such as religion and metaphysics to provide objective answers, and what forms nihilism can encompass, such as existential nihilism, moral nihilism, epistemic nihilism, and cosmic nihilism. And Dinesh also conveniently leaves out the somewhat important distinction that Miłosz was a lifelong fucking Catholic, which is pretty important information when it comes to understanding the foundation of Miłosz's criticism of nihilism in the wake of his having narrowly survived the German occupation of Warsaw, and then his being forced to defect to France and then exiled to the US after being threatened by communist authorities under Stalin. Miłosz, being a devout believer in his God, interpreted the position of nihilism through the lens of his prior held belief, and as such he viewed it as providing a hiding place for individuals who didn't didn't want to take moral accountability for the sins that they knew that they were committing, which mistakenly assumes that such individuals are all believers themselves, that they all agree with his view on what a god is, and that they also possess the belief that sin is a thing that exists, and that their individual conceptualization of what constitutes sin is equivalent to his own. Miłosz's own bias, which was derived from his personal faith position and his direct experiences during World War II and in post-war Poland, directly influenced his analysis of nihilism, which invariably led him to an erroneous conclusion regarding the nature of that particular philosophical position.
So basically, as Miłosz is arguing, the Marxist doctrine needs to be revised or actually turned on its head. Remember, Marx called religion the opium or opiate of the people, but it's not religion that's the opiate of the people, but atheism that is the opiate of the morally corrupt.
You're so clever.
So firstly, the whole reason that Dinesh is bringing up Marxism here is because Miłosz's criticism of nihilism in the work that Dinesh is quoting from was directly aimed at Marxism. And while there is a ton of interesting historical stuff that we could unpack there, I'm not going to do it because none of it is actually relevant to the position of atheism itself.
Thank Christ.
Everything that Dinesh is bringing up here is nothing more than an amalgamation of unsubstantive apologist talking points that are specifically invoked when criticizing atheism, which means he is either ignorant of the fact or is just completely ignoring that it is all a massive straw man. Essentially, Dinesh is straw manning the position of atheism with an appeal to emotion, specifically an appeal to consequences. That the position of atheism can, depending upon a number of other factors such as psychological and emotional states, possibly lead to holding other philosophical positions that he subjectively does not like or views as being harmful, does not logically entail that his particular conclusion is the correct one or that the position of atheism itself is not rationally justified.
Morally corrupt people like atheism because they feel like, wow, if I'm an atheist, I don't have any moral accountability.
And that is just a flat-out lie. As has been demonstrated in the past, Dinesh D'Souza is a liar. He is a wanton and unrepentant breaker of his 9th commandment, and he banks on his audience lacking the capacity to recognize that fact. Nothing really more to say in response to that hasn't already been said.
If you want to live a degenerate life, well, God is your mortal enemy. He represents a lethal danger to your selfishness, greed, lechery, hatred. It's in your interest to despise him and do whatever you can to rid the universe of his presence.
This, of course, all assumes a belief that such an entity exists, which would also be utterly irrational, because if someone did believe that that particular entity in fact existed, then it follows that they would understand that by definition such an entity cannot be defeated. I swear, the depths of intellectual dishonesty that this guy is willing to stoop to in order to sell his narrative is legitimately staggering. And we're going to skip this section because it's just Dinesh further quoting from Miłosz's work, and he invokes some of the demonic elements contained in Milton's Paradise Lost and then claims that atheists are attracted to such elements. Basically, it's a few points that we already know are completely nonsensical and completely irrelevant when addressing the position of atheism.
Think about it. If God does not exist, the 7 deadly sins are not terrors to be overcome, but, well, temptations to be enjoyed. And death, which was previously viewed as a justification for morality, now becomes a justification for immorality.
That also doesn't logically follow. There are plenty of atheists who subjectively recognize that an overindulgence in certain behaviors can be detrimental to the individual and even to the society. There's just one problem here, Dinesh, because now we're talking about normative moral valuations, which means we are not talking about atheism anymore.
Now, interestingly, the philosopher who understood all this was Nietze. And contrary to modern atheists who say, the death of God doesn't mean an end of morality.
That's true, because ridding a society of its dependence upon God concepts does not entail that humans would suddenly lose their capacity for empathy and their ability to make moral valuations. It would just mean that the stances that inform their moral valuations no longer have a logically inconsistent God concept to function as a check on them.
Nietze goes, well, it does. It actually does mean that.
Yeah, but that's Nietzsche's position, which itself was a cultural expounding upon the ideas of German philosopher Friedrich H. Jacobi, who first coined the term in his critique of the rationalism of the Enlightenment, and it's a position that he held at the end of the 19th century. Nietzsche was never the CEO of nihilism, and there has been over a century of further development in the field of philosophy. Invoking Nietzsche to attack atheism is like invoking Ernst Haeckel to attack evolution, and citing Nietzsche as if his personal position on on nihilism, which, while undeniably deeply informed by the profound cynicism he developed as a result of his personal experiences, he didn't even really advocate for, is the only position that one can take is just cherry-picking the philosophy in order to sell a specific narrative.
Because God is the source of the moral law. And so if God is dead, Nietzsche of course coined the phrase the death of God, then God's death means that the ground has been swept out from under us. We have become, in a sense, ethically groundless. And there is no more refuge to be taken in appeals to dignity, equality, compassion, and all the rest. Because all that we have is the abyss not just of God, but of morality.
While that is a somewhat fair recounting of Nietzsche's ethical views, it's only half of them. Because if Dinesh had any interest in being honest, he would have gone on to cite Nietzsche's advocacy for viewing this new groundless state as a stepping stone for humanity to transcend itself by overcoming what he saw as traditional slave morality. In short, Nietzsche interpreted the death of God as being the perfect opportunity for humans to become better than they were. And while it is true that the deeply cynical Nietzsche did not hold that humans had the capacity to achieve such a noble state, I, and many millions of others around the planet, do not share in his cynicism. And we can skip this section because it's just more of Dinesh cherry-picking the parts of Nietzsche's philosophy that he doesn't like, while entirely ignoring all of the positive outcomes for humanity that his philosophy led him to conclude. Like I pointed out, it's nothing more than philosophical cherry-picking, a handful of logical fallacies, a complete misrepresentation of what atheism is and what it entails, and he never once provides any justification for his own position beyond an appeal to emotion. In the end, it's the exact same shit that he tried to pull on Alex O'Connor in their debate, and it's still as useless and bankrupt as it was then as when he recorded this video. Now, there are many people out there who will certainly hold that bridging the divide with someone like D'Souza is pretty much impossible. Whether or not his intellectual dishonesty is a result of his ignorance, willful or otherwise, or is just a deliberate tactic meant to manipulate the more gullible members of his audience really doesn't matter, because the mere existence of it presents a near insurmountable obstacle to honest, productive discourse. And if you happen to have watched the D'Souza-O'Connor debate in its entirety, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. So instead of becoming discouraged at the thought of trying to overcome a mindset like D'Souza's, I think it serves us better to simply bypass them by exposing and countering their rhetoric for the sake of the audience. History has repeatedly shown us that individuals who are as manipulative and dishonest as D'Souza obviously is will only ever be granted so much leeway in the public square, and as such, in continuing their grift, they will inevitably run out of credit and find themselves being run out on a rail and left to vanish into obscurity. So the best way that we can bridge the divide is by continuously demonstrating that we have the capacity to be the very thing that these individuals cannot be. And that is honest with the audience by first being willing to be honest with ourselves. And with that, we come to the end of the last video of 2025. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please like, share, and subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications. And be sure to leave a comment below. I love reading your responses, and those interactions help with the dreaded algorithm. Don't forget, December is National HIV/AIDS Awareness Month. The link to where you can support these important efforts is down in the description. And if you like what you saw here and would like to support this channel further, links to channel membership and to get yourself some official Bridge the Divide gear are also in the description. Once again, a massive thank you to each and every one of you for making 2025 an amazing year here at Bridge the Divide, and as always, be safe, be excellent to each other, and together we can bridge the divide.